what happens if BYU and Texas Tech do not win out, right? That seems to be the most likely scenario, that you get a BYU Texas Tech rematch in the Big 12 championship game. But what are the most likely scenarios if that does not happen? And who's moving in the power rankings? Okay. You bet, even this late in the season, when it seems like the top three are incredibly obvious in the Big 12, I'm still going to give you Big 12 power rankings. Okay. So I still may slight your team. Arizona fans who are coming after me a bit on Saturday after that win, where am I going to put the Wildcats? We'll see. Okay. So the easy thing here, if BYU and Texas Tech win out, that's the title game. All right. That's pretty easily understood. But I was running around using the generator, which I wish there was a way. I can't put a link in the chat. I will try to run back and put a link in the description of the video afterwards for a link to this. It's you pick the result of each game that's left on the Big 12 schedule. It'll pump out what the Big 12 title game would be. Chris Karpman, Karpman, who covers Arizona State, has been tweeting the link out a lot with some scenarios for Arizona State. You could go find it there if you want to mess around with it yourself. Part of the problem here is there are just a million scenarios because when some of these tiebreakers turn into record of common opponents and stuff like that. So literally all of those games that you would be picking this week and next week do matter, could affect things. There are still a bazillion possibilities here. But I try to at least distill this to, hey, look, we know that Arizona State and Utah seem to be the next two most likely to get in here, Cincinnati and Houston still involved with just 2 conference losses also. Here's how I have tried to distill this in the most appropriate way possible. If Cincinnati beats TCU and BYU and Houston wins out, then it would be Utah in the Big 12 championship game. So Cincinnati beats BYU, upsets the apple cart there. Then they finish it off by beating TCU, and Houston wins games over TCU and Baylor. Then Utah would go to the conference championship game. If you're Arizona State, one of the prereqs you have to have is you have to have a Cincinnati beating BYU result, basically. If Cincinnati beats BYU, but then loses that last game to TCU, which possible enough, right? Then Arizona State would be in, at least in the scenario that I had where I had the rest of the favorites winning. That definitely opens some doors for Arizona State. Chris Karpman has said Arizona State very likely needs BYU to lose at Cincinnati. If that happens, several other combinations of very plausible outcomes would get Arizona State into the Big 12 championship game. He had four that came up here. Okay. So there are lots of ways if that happens. If BYU were to stumble and lose to Cincinnati, it opens doors for obviously Utah, but also Arizona State as next in line, it would appear. But guys, this does get incredibly wild because where's the Reddit college football tweet from earlier today? Here it is. There is still a scenario. They have pumped out the results page for a scenario in which we have a 6-way tie for first place in the Big 12 with 6 teams at 7-2. Now, this obviously requires a lot of craziness happening. BYU would have to lose. Texas Tech would have to lose at West Virginia. But you'd have Utah, Arizona State, Texas Tech, BYU, Houston, and Cincy all at 7-2. If you're curious, in that scenario, we get Utah and Arizona State in the Big 12 championship game. And everything that I just talked about with SEC countries saying, why do we give the ACC a bid? Why do we give the G6 a bid? That conversation would come down heavy on the Big 12 in that scenario, right? That's going to come down heavily on the Big 12 if that were to play out, all right? But you already knew that. I don't think you needed me to tell you that. Anyway, there are a number of scenarios. I would encourage you, if you're hyper interested in this, if you're an Arizona State fan, if you're a Utah fan, if you're a BYU fan, Cincinnati fan, whoever, Houston fan, you're trying to see these, I would suggest going and finding them to mess with on your own, because I could try to lay out to you every single scenario. It's still, hopefully by the end of this week, it'll be much more simple. And we could say, hey, if X, then Y, here's Z. Here's your conference championship game. Now, as far as my Big 12 power rankings go, let's do this. ChatGPT was not kind to me today. I had to just take a screenshot for the Big 12 power rankings this week. So I apologize that it's not very formatted and that you can still see the cursor next to the number one. This is what happens when AI fails us. They're not coming for your job, folks. They can't even pump out a graphic for me. Texas Tech is number one. I do think, as we have seen, there's a significant gap between Texas Tech and BYU and Utah. In fact, we have it measured to about 3 possessions. There's about a 3-possession gap between Texas Tech and BYU and Utah. Then I think there definitely is a sizable gap before you get to Arizona State, Arizona, Cincinnati, and Houston. And I would clump those teams right there. Lots of people like to do the tier lists every week. I think this is a pretty easy conference at this point to just do tier lists of. Texas Tech, national championship caliber. BYU, Utah, playoff caliber. Good teams, Arizona State, Arizona, Cincinnati, Houston. And then you're down to just, it's kind of mediocre until you get to, I'd put the cutoff at like, I would debate, do I cut it off at 14 or 15 there to just bad teams, outright bad teams. West Virginia, the way they're playing now, man, I definitely think they belong in the group with Kansas, Baylor, TCU, K-State, Iowa State. UCF, I don't know if I can do the same. Don't know if I can do the same with that right now. And I know UCF has been beaten up with a bunch of injuries as well there. But look, Arizona, all the way up at 5. All right. They just beat Cincinnati, so I put them above there. Even though they have one more conference loss, I put them above Houston, who beat them and has one less conference loss. Arizona fans, you're going to catch me heat with Houston fans, but I'm trying to show you some love and respect for validating your season with the win at Cincinnati. Okay. So that's what I've got. Houston fans, you can fill up the comments if you're angry at me for that. That is fair. Everything else, anything from like 8 through 16. Honestly, if you came and argued something at me about 8 through 16 in those power rankings, I would probably just say, yeah, okay, fair. That's fine. I do not feel strongly about it, I guess is the point. I halfway debated, like, does Iowa State belong in that group with Arizona State, Arizona, Cincy, and Houston? And I was like, hard to know with the way TCU is crumbling what to make of that result in Fort Worth. So, 4-game losing streak, I left Iowa State in that group, but they get to be the top of that group. Okay. You get to be the top of the group. So it could be worse. It could be worse. There's at least that. All right. So there are your Big 12 power rankings for this week. Let me get to starter 179 real quickly here. Starter 179. Starter 179 says, you're going to hate me for asking this, but after this week, K-State looks like they don't care. The program looks like it's close to bottoming out. Why? Yeah, I mean, bottoming out, I will say this. I think there are some distinctions here. In fairness, it looked like in late September, they were definitely going to be bottoming out this year. They stemmed the tide on that. And for 5-6 weeks, they played like at least a decent Power 4 football team. Like, I think the Texas Tech game, they played with a lot of heart and a lot of effort and gave Texas Tech about as good a run as anybody in the Big 12 outside of Arizona State has. So I had no issues with that. In fact, I thought Matt Wells had maybe one of his best games trying to come up with creative ways to run the ball on Texas Tech, and he made it happen a bit. So the problem is now the Oklahoma State game, you're coming off a bye week. You're more injured. You lost Austin Romaine, your best linebacker. Jace Brown gets hurt in the game, goes out. They're playing with no energy, no effort. That game, please, for the sake of you and your loved ones, do not allow anybody to watch the tape of that K-State Oklahoma State game that ended in a 14-6 final in Stillwater. Just don't do it. Oklahoma State turned it over 5 times. It was ridiculous. K-State's offense couldn't move the ball at all. Everybody this year in a Power 4 conference has scored 38 on Oklahoma State. Fun fact, except for K-State, who scored 14. So, yeah, it was bad. It feels real bad. It feels very blah. I think a lot of things went wrong from the jump this season. For whatever reason, they just couldn't get these guys energized to play games. They have played multiple games where it looks like they don't care, about 4 of them by my count at this point this year. The problem here is the attitude. Chris Kleiman sitting there in his press conference after the game saying, I'm not going to apologize for winning in Stillwater. It's hard to win in Stillwater. I hate that. I mean, I just can't emphasize enough how much I hate that. I think the athletic department waited around instead of preparing to continue to raise money and fund a roster above the rev share cap. I think the attitude of the athletic department is we're going to naively hope and tell everybody and count on that CSC is going to enforce any NIL deals above the rev share cap, and they're just going to hammer people with punishment and you won't be able to do it. What has predictably happened with that? Go read the Sports Business, not the Sports Business Journal. I'm forgetting the outlet that's done a lot of good reporting on that. Anyway, go read about it. It's not happening. It's not happening. And now I think K-State's a bit behind the eight ball for trying to fund its football roster and potential coaching changes that may happen. Not head coach. I'm talking about assistants. I think they're in a tight spot because there was not enough foresight on that. And there was not enough, hey, let's go bust it and get things figured out. Meanwhile, down the road, Kansas is busting it with its biggest donor and getting $300 million. I think frankly, I think it's just been kind of a lazy sit back on your feet attitude with the whole athletic department right now. And I think they need a bit of a kick in the ass if they're going to get it figured out here in the next few years and not fall into a hole where they bottom out. So that's my very brief State of the Union address on K-State athletics and K-State football, Starter 179. You can listen to the 3 Mile podcast if you want more on that.